So we are live now.
Good evening, everybody. We will wait for maybe 2 minutes more before we start our session today. Yeah. It's 2 p.m. I guess we can start. Good evening and good afternoon to all of you all. Very warm welcome to everybody and making the time for joining us today on this webinar focused on Indian automotive industry, switching gears to resilience. Next. Before we start, a few ground rules on the Zoom, especially on the instructions on using the Zoom for participants. On the Q&A tab, which appears in the bottom panel of Zoom, participants can type in the questions anytime during the webinar. And in case any participant would like to ask any questions, they can just press or click on the raise hand button, and we will try to unmute the line and take the questions. There will be polls during the session. I would encourage all the participants to vote on our live polling during the webinar. Next. It's my pleasure to introduce our eminent panel of speakers today. I'll start with Mr. Sudhir Chikle, Senior Vice President, Ashok Leyland Limited. Mr. Sachin Jain, Vice President, Finance, Anand Automotive Group. Ishiro Seno, Regional Automotive Industry Leader, Marsh Asia. Graham Riddle, Consulting and Sustainability Leader, Marsh Asia. We have Inayat Nizwan, Property Risk Consulting Leader for Marsh India. Sahil Chadda, Automotive Leader, Marsh India. And myself, Prakash Rajan, Sales and Industry Practice Leader, Marsh India. Welcome to everybody. Today for the agenda, we have the items mentioned here. We will start with a slide on evolving risk landscape. We will touch upon the Indian automotive industry, this seismic shift that we're seeing in the industry. Some of the newsmakers in 2021, which is around the supply chain challenges, sustainability, electric vehicles. Then we can focus on the Marsh advantage, followed by panel discussion with our eminent speakers in the panel, and followed by a Q&A session and closing remarks. Next. I'll start with a poll question. Which of the following are emerging risks for Indian companies? This is a multiple choice question. We have cyber, emerging disruptive technologies, pandemic, climate ESG, employee health, safety, and mental well-being. Please do participate and we would be keen to know the results. Great. So cyber is emerging as the top risk item, followed by pandemic and then the emerging technologies, which is disruptive in nature. So that's very much in line with the next slide that we'll be discussing on, and that's on the seismic shift and how we look at the evolving risk landscape. So this slide is an extract from the World Economic Forum. So Marsh and McLennan works closely with the World Economic Forum to publish a world risk report. And this slide essentially talks about the emerging risks that we can see in the developed and developing economies. So it's very interesting to see in both the columns here, which is focusing on the advanced economies in the left-hand side and the emerging markets, how certain risk has really moved up the scale in terms of the priorities to the corporates in the industry overall. So the key observations that I can mention here is, obviously due to the pandemic, we can see the spread of infectious diseases and associated economic risk, such as unemployment and fiscal crisis, are the global concerns of the day, which is impacting both the markets, both advanced and the emerging markets. I'm also equally interested to see the natural catastrophes in the emerging markets. This again moved 17 basis points up. If you look at the overall scale, how it is moving. That's again due to the increased sort of losses that we can see in the insured as well as the non-insured perils. A lot of catastrophes are impacting the industry, and that's again a matter of concern. And if you look at the economies across the advanced economies, cyber continues to be the top risk item, and it has not changed since 2019. So that's again the top risk issue that is impacting the industry. And also geopolitical risk in the emerging markets continues to be one of the top risk items and which is of concern. So that's how we can see the emerging landscape of risk, and which is ever evolving and it's very dynamic also. So we will take up this in the next slide, how dynamic the risk environment is. And when we look at risk which is evolving and the complexity of the risks which are shifting, the concept of resilience is more than important now, and how it is embedded within the overall risk framework and the strategy framework of the corporates. So what is risk resiliency? It is nothing but the ability to minimize losses and how quickly the business can come to normalcy. And also it gives a strategic advantage if we are well prepared in terms of resiliency in the competitive market that we are in today. The better we prepared in terms of resiliency, the better we have a competitive edge, and we can come out of it even more better than some of our peers. Also to highlight here, the impact of risk, which is so growing, is primarily due to the hyper-connected nature of the business operations today. The integrated nature of our business and the geographies, be it your any risk issue today, it's so connected across the globe, be it a semiconductor shortage or any component which is manufactured across the globe, it tends to really impact overall the industry in many ways. So 4 drivers to resiliency, which we will be again discussing in the subsequent slides, this talks about anticipation, how do we forecast these kind of issues, agility, the move that we can do faster, and collaboration. The present risk tools are not so efficient, and we need to look at how we can be better prepared. Risk resilience report. So Marsh and McLennan really have specialities in the industries, and this brings us a competitive advantage in front of our clients. the study that we do across the industry is of great value to our clients. So this resilience report is something which we could generate basis our interaction across industries, across the globe. Some of the studies that we could do gives some interesting findings here. Obviously, the concept of resilience is kind of disconnected. Here, if you can see on the top right quadrant, whether resilience is integrated within risk and strategy, no. 68% of the firms having revenues about 10 billion do not integrate resilience with strategy. This is a growing concern, and we will discuss in detail in the subsequent slides. 89% indicate that emerging tech is important, but only 9% are highly prepared. We will discuss on this. Coming to regulatory risk, 93% indicate that regulatory risk is critical, but only 28% actually evaluate the primary exposures in this section. And only 10% measure the risk across the enterprise. So this is some interesting findings. Next, we'll have Sahil Chadda, who is our automotive industry leader, for the next slide.
Yeah, thank you, Prakash sir, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining the webinar today. I think thank you, Prakash sir, for setting the tone on the theme of the webinar today, which is resilience. So just before we really get into the topics, which I'm sure are very keenly awaited by the audience on the session, we would just like to throw some light on some of the key trends that have been there in the automotive industry globally and also in India. So I think in the last, I would say 2 years, we're almost 2 years now since COVID really began. And the pandemic has obviously put the entire financial strength and the supply chain resiliency of the automotive industry to test. No doubt, the industry has really come out in a very stupendous way with initiatives and strategies that possibly have been a learning for a lot of other industry segments as well. So while that has been one of the challenging side, the industry also identified a lot of opportunities, say, for example, in terms of introducing vehicles which are more healthier for the environment. We've seen a lot of technology development, say in the form of bringing in autonomous technologies in the vehicles or even connected technologies for that matter. So that's the positive side. So while there has been an element of the consumer confidence also wavering because of the uncertainties around, but at the same time, we've seen a lot of change in the entire shift in the mobility ecosystem. So while at one point of time, people are very keen to look at shared mobility as a key focus area, now because of the pandemic, people are looking at personalized mobility as a focus area. So now this is obviously an opportunity for the automotive industry because that means there will be an increased demand for vehicles. At the same time, we've also seen that the industry has now moved on. So while earlier the adoption of technology was restricted to just the processes in manufacturing, now we see the use of technology really extending beyond manufacturing to supply chain, to the entire distribution system, as well as the engagement with customers. Now, indeed, the increase in the use of technology or digitalization has increased the risk exposures to cyber as well. So we've seen a lot of incidents with respect to data and privacy threats or breaches happening in the industry. And last but not the least, obviously, the regulatory environment for the automotive industry is also going through a lot of change. So we've seen regulations around emission, we've seen regulations around the safety for the vehicles, passenger safety, pedestrian safety. So obviously the regulatory environment across various countries and for the industry at large is also seeing a lot of change in the landscape. Now, when you look at the India from an Indian context, obviously these trends which exist globally are relevant for India as well. But we've had some very unique trends in the Indian environment too. So in 2020, obviously India transitioned from Bharat Stage 4 to Bharat Stage 6. That's obviously one of the signs of our commitment towards reducing the carbon footprint and reducing the emissions coming out from the vehicles. That has obviously also resulted in the increased focus on cleaner and greener fuel. So we've recently heard about the flex fuel engines becoming one of the focus areas. So there was a recent announcement that maybe by the month of June 2022, all of the manufacturers across two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and four-wheelers will have to have some form of flex fuel engines as a part of their portfolio. So the commitment of the Indian government and the society at large towards reducing the carbon footprint coming out of vehicles certainly is a top priority. At the same time, we've also seen the introduction of the vehicle scrappage policy. This will obviously have multifold impact. So on the one side, there will be a reason for people to possibly get off their vehicles which are otherwise unfit for the road. It will help us avoid the kind of emission challenges that these vehicles are bringing in. These vehicles are also possibly not very safe, and at the same time it will be an opportunity for the automotive industry to look at these people as the potential buyers for new vehicles. So that will obviously result into a replacement demand, since they will be getting rid of their older vehicles. As we touched upon from a safety point of view, India obviously has been focusing a lot in ensuring that the vehicles which are on the road are safe both for the passengers as well as for the pedestrians. So we've seen guidelines coming around the introduction of the co-passenger airbag being made mandatory. We've seen parking sensors being made mandatory, rear parking sensors. At the same time, the design of the vehicle is also now being made in such a way that it's safer for the pedestrians on the road as well. And now, as with passage of time in the last couple of months, we are seeing that mass selling vehicles are also coming up with the advanced driver assist systems, which will make the vehicles obviously safer for the passenger as well as for the pedestrians as well. So we do see these technologies being introduced. The other area of opportunity that we certainly see in India is that India is now focusing on becoming self-sustainable as far as the entire value chain of the industry is concerned. So obviously at one point of time, we were highly dependent on imports, whether it is for key components or even for vehicles at large. Today, the government is ensuring that they are offering all possible incentives and benefits to manufacturers to set up shop in India. So that is both for the multinational companies and for our Indian domestic companies. So under the Make in India initiative, the idea is that we should try to manufacture as much as we can, which will obviously ensure that the industry is sustainable by itself. It will also result in employment, and then obviously it will help India become a major manufacturing and automotive hub in the country, in the world. And at the same time, we are also seeing that the amount of investment that is happening on research and development. So there are companies who are investing towards developing newer technologies, newer products, newer components, which clearly means that yes, India is going to not be restricted only to manufacturing, but will also equally focus on research and development. The number of patents that have been filed by Indian automotive companies in the last 3 years, that has exponentially grown, which is clearly a sign that yes, we are focusing a lot on research. And last but not the least, India obviously remains an opportunity with the favorable policies being introduced by the government towards investment. That is ensuring that more and more foreign companies are looking at India as an opportunity to set up shop, both from a manufacturing and a research and development hub. So yes, India will be seeing more and more investments coming in the times to come. Now, as we move on to the key topics which have actually made news in 2021, we will start with supply chain, and I would like to invite my property risk consulting leader, Inayat Mizwan, to take up the first poll question. Inayat, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sahil. So we have the second poll question, which basically says, which of the followings are an impact of a disruption in the supply chain in automotive industry? Is it reduction in production and sales, delayed deliveries, loss of customers and market share, increase in operational and product cost, or all of the above? So request all the participants to participate in the poll. Yeah, so I think the response what we got from the participants are self-explanatory, and which is exactly is the main thing. For a supply chain, there is no single cause which have led to a disruption. There are multiple areas or factors which lead to a disruption of a supply chain, and that too for automotive industry. Yeah, next slide. So as we speak, our automotive supply chain is a pretty complex supply chain, and with the hyper-connected global business environment, the challenge for the supply chain has gone to a whole new world. And in fact, in a new world, in a world where one problem in a isolated region has bring down the supply chain to its knees. Just defying the usual approach what we typically used to have as a business as usual, the risk management. So this type of business as usual approach is not good enough. Now, there are several factors which impacts the supply chain, starting from sourcing, and then what we have seen is in recent strategy is outsourcing lot of operations. Now, while outsourcing does give an advantage in terms of increasing the efficiency in the business, but it also leads to complexity in the operation, at the same time creating a vulnerability from a third party risk. The second is regulatory, as Sahil indicated earlier, in terms of the emission norms or the scrap policies or the pedestrian or passenger safety. Those regulatory norms are keep changing, thus also impacts the supply chain. Logistic has been always an issue in terms of either port shutdown, wet damages, accidents, or overturn. The new I would say area of where things are changing is the technology. With the use of artificial intelligence, where smart and autonomous vehicles are being manufactured. This is one factor which started playing an important role in a supply chain. And then what we have also seen is it's not only the vehicle or vehicle which is impacted, but also associated system as simple as a telecommunication grid. So these important factors will start playing important role in our automotive supply chain. Then we have a regular commodity item, which is basically oil, raw material, natural resources, and then external cyber security. As we have seen earlier in terms of artificial intelligence, how smart and autonomous vehicles are creating a new buzz. Same time, cyber security concerns are also growing. Geopolitical risk, a very classic example is what we have seen strikes of farmers in the northern area, which disrupted the transportation or at least delayed the transportation. And then environmental impact. Earlier, Mr. Rajan has indicated, Prakash Rajan has indicated, how climate change is impacting the overall business approach company is taking. So earlier, in the past, we have seen single NatCat event creating a big supply chain disruption. So these are some of the critical important factors when we talk about automotive supply chain. Yeah. Now, when we look at into the risk landscape, so there are some important factors which has made the supply chain more evolved or more important, including focus on operational excellence, just-in-time order fulfillment, outsourcing and offshoring, and abundant manufacturing capabilities in the developing countries. Now, what it has resulted is obviously a complexity and sophistication, high number of suppliers from a traditional few suppliers. Then we have dependency and interdependency and global geographical reach. Now, because of these drivers and the result, what we have seen outcome of those drivers, the consequences are far more deep, and starting with lack of resilience. So one of the survey which was conducted by independent agency for the OEMs, what it was it showcased that there is a wide disparity among the OEM when it comes to mapping of the suppliers or the visibility of the suppliers. Some OEMs indicated that only 10 to 20% is the visibility rate what they have, while some of the high performing OEMs indicated there is more than 70% visibility rate what they have, down to the tier 2 supplier. So that is the reason the lack of resilience is one of the critical consequence. Apart from that, susceptibility to change. As we have seen, the more complex or sophisticated is the system, the more difficult is to make changes. And that change impacts the overall footprint. So making those changes usually happens or may not even or may get delayed. Then we have hidden interdependency. Again, a very recent or a classic example is the shortage of semiconductors, chips. OEMs were relying on the tier one supplier, who were in turn procuring from the global semicon manufacturer or production companies, who in turn are relied on a handful of vapor manufacturing companies who have limited few fabrication sites. So hidden interdependencies are a lot of time missed out while looking into the entire supply chain risk landscape. And then once we look into these landscape and connect with the COVID impact and the economic downturn, be it a poor access to credit, reduction in demand, or weakening currency or insolvency, these two important factors have led to a increased strain and its increased risk exposure to the supply chain. Next slide. So when we talk about supply chain, we understood the complexity, we understood the risk landscape. So what can be done to address the supply chain risk? But the first thing is the supply chain risk. We need not address the entire supply chain in one go. We need to focus on the areas where it can impact most. So there is a saying, we need to have a balance between a better, faster, a cheaper supply chain vis-a-vis a choice, a buffer, or a resilient supply chain. Now, where should be your focus? It should be either identifying the key suppliers, identifying the key products, a particular area of concern, or the geographical region. However, the first step starts with conducting a value segmentation, so that you identify the product and services which can be further drilled down into a further analysis. So once you have done the initial supply chain mapping in terms of identifying the dependency, the next step is identifying the vulnerability. Identifying the dependency and vulnerability are two different subjects. So when we say identifying the vulnerability, a simple small component, what sort of impact it can have to your operation or to your business. So identifying the vulnerability plays an important role. Now, once we have identified the key threats and vulnerability, the next step is risk quantification. Now, we have seen a lot of our clients and a lot of our companies, what they do is they do a value mapping, they do identify the vulnerabilities, and then they stop there. However, until and unless we don't do a risk quantification in terms of evaluating the supply chain risk on the supply financial impact, mitigation and transfer option cannot be appropriately considered. So it's important that once we identify the vulnerability and threat, we do a risk quantification so that the efforts can be rooted into a right direction. And the quantification is not only limited to the financial impact, but also to the non-financial impact as well, wherever it is applicable. Now, once we have done the risk quantification, the other last step is ensuring that we have adequate, appropriate risk mitigation measures to address the identified threat and quantified risk. And not only identifying and taking measures, we also need to ensure that we are monitoring these important measures and ensuring that it is functional. Next slide, please. Now, this is the process, understanding, assessing, defining, identifying, and mapping, and then finally categorizing. It is a big subject, too complex to do everything. So the point here is, or the key is to analyze the priorities. Once we have analyzed the priorities, we need to focus on the key areas of vulnerability and then classify the risk and vulnerability so that, which will allow the entire group or organization to optimize their response and make the supply chain more resilient. So now I'll ask my colleague, Graham, to take this forward for his next discussion. Graham?
Thank you, and thanks everybody for joining us today as well to in this webinar. So I'm going to be talking about the sustainability risks that might be apparent for the industry. But to start off, we have another poll question. So for your own company, which of the following are the sustainability focus areas for automotive companies? So we've got option A, sustainable sourcing of materials, manufacturing, process, and supply chain. Second, vulnerability to climate change. Third, efficiencies in energy consumption. Fourth, employee health and safety, including mental health. And fifth, corporate governance and risk management. So which are you kind of focusing on with a heightened degree of emphasis? We'll give some time for responses. Are we going? So we're getting them come in. So yes, top number one, sustainable sourcing of materials are very much connected to the supply chain discussion that we just were so excellently taken through. Leading by far, and then efficiencies in energy consumption, obviously a large amount of focus on carbon emissions, and also the kind of economic benefits of acting more sustainably on energy use as well. So I might close that, and if we can go on to the slides. Great, thanks. So I've laid out some stats there for you to consider, but the overarching message of these four big numbers is that sustainability, can really no longer be considered a nice thing to do. It's not something that's on the side of your business or treated just as a social responsibility effort. It's really now kind of a key determinant of future success and future viability in the market. And it's also a big risk to build into our management strategies and how we deal with it, because to me, sustainability and climate change is actually just turning the heat up on a lot of the risks that we're discussing today, and kind of accelerating these risks and making them more complicated. So when we think of supply chain, the complexity of suppliers that we deal with within first, second, third tier, now we need to consider the reputational risks that we might suffer if there are ESG concerns in those organizations. We need to consider the increasing frequency and intensity of different climate change events in different places around the world that we're increasingly dependent on. So it's really just an accelerator of the risk landscape that we're dealing with. And the pressure comes from a lot of directions. But the kind of overarching message is the same, that more sustainable businesses are just more attractive to consumers, investors, financial markets, regulators, and employees, to be honest. And from a risk and insurance perspective, a sustainable business is a better risk as well. You'll be managing losses better. So getting kind of sustainability right within an organization, and particularly within the automotive sector, can unlock new opportunities. And we can see that through the kind of massive projection and growth for electric vehicles. It can provide better access to capital and more concessional terms. There is so much capital in the world looking for green and sustainable products and projects and companies to be directed to. The Glasgow Financial Net Zero Alliance that got announced at COP26 is $130 billion worth of assets looking to support the $130 trillion worth of assets under management looking to support the transition to net zero. So, unlocking that is critical. On the other end, more kind of bottom up, it makes companies more attractive to employees and helps you retain them. And as a side note of all these, wonderful commercial benefits, it does, of course, end up leaving a better environment and society for future generations, as well as kind of reducing things like pollution right at the moment. So managing risks and kind of realizing these opportunities is a really strong win for businesses. If we go to the next slide. The flip side, I would say, of course, of all of this opportunity is risk. either from taking action, so committing to be more sustainable and taking action on ESG issues does potentially open you up to new risks. So you're probably going to be looking at new technologies, new EV charging facilities. All of these are just new technologies that you're going to deploy, and that changes your risk profile. So you might need to consider that. It's also a tricky balance of how fast do you move and how do you manage capital deployment as you're making these transitions in your business strategy as you move towards electric. And also, this is kind of harping on the point, but understanding where new risks might emerge in your supply chain, because you're going to be working with new suppliers as you shift towards a more sustainable business, and understanding what they're dependent on. And we see lots of issues in this in terms of rare earth minerals and batteries and things like that. A very hot topic when we look at sustainability and ESG. There's also kind of risks from inaction. And I was speaking earlier about gaining better access to capital. The risk of not taking action is just, will I have future access to capital? Will I be able to borrow money anymore? Will I be able to get insurance anymore for certain activities? Because national and international commitments are directing capital in certain ways. Big financial institutions are increasingly putting scrutiny on this. So it's not even potentially just an option of getting, the carrot of sustainability. There is a stick of not moving in a certain direction as well. Customers are also no longer willing to do business with you as they kind of increase their own scrutiny on what's happening in your supply chain. You might not be able to supply to the next player up in your supply chain as well, if you're not managing your own ESG risks, but they're looking at their vendors just the same. And you're also kind of at the macro level, if emissions keep on rising and we don't transition quickly enough, extreme weather is only going to get ramped up even more. We're already seeing extremes in the last 10 years that we've never seen before, all around the world. That's only going to continue to accelerate and impact on your own assets, your critical lifelines, your dependencies across people, materials, and transportation and access to markets. So lots of risk, both from taking action and not taking action, but I think opportunity lies in becoming more sustainable and integrating ESG and climate risks into your strategy. And just to call out, I'm sure this audience is far more familiar with the product recall issues that have happened in the last 12 months within India, but it's definitely one of those emerging signals that we look to go, actually, something's changing here, and there is a reason why these issues are emerging, and we can manage those better with the integration of ESG into our strategies. If we go to the next. So I've just laid out here kind of 5 questions that I think businesses and the automotive industry within India can kind of take away from this talk and ask these questions on Monday morning. It's Friday afternoon, we're almost done for the week, but scribble this down on a piece of paper, or I'm sure we're sharing the materials afterwards. But Monday morning, Monday afternoon, post coffee or tea, have a think about these questions around how is ESG actually integrated and factored into your risk management? Is it at all? What gaps might exist in what you're doing right now when you start thinking holistically across environment, social, and governance issues? Where could risks lie in your supply chain from answering those first 2 questions? Interestingly enough, in a competitive landscape as well, there is a green premium to be had if you are acting sustainably. So have a look at what your peers are doing. What are they committing to? What policies and procedures do they have in place to manage sustainability and climate risks? And maybe, run a quick ideation session on what are the emerging risks and opportunities that might exist under, a move to net zero, such as India's committed to. Have a consideration around what those risks and opportunities could be in those movements. So 5 questions to consider either later this evening or first thing Monday morning. If we go to the next, and just to say, that Marsh is actually now working very heavily in this space and is ready to partner with clients to kind of answer some of those questions before. So we really focus on helping clients prepare, ensure, and analyze against emerging climate and sustainability threats. And that's around, on the prepare side, really those questions that I just asked earlier, starting to assess your own performance and communicate that performance to the markets and to your stakeholders, embedding sustainability and climate change into your risk management procedures, and building resilience to emerging risks from both increasingly kind of severe and frequent physical risks of climate change, as well as resilience to the transition that we need to undertake to a low carbon economy or a net zero carbon economy. Analyze, of course, we underpin all of this with a lot of metrics and modeling, and I went through some of that on the supply chain side. But it's really important to understand your risk exposures and be able to quantify your risk exposures to these types of things so we can look to transfer it. The same goes for climate and sustainability. And finally, of course, insurance. One side on looking sure on helping clients understand that they're ready for the emerging risks of new technology and adequately covered for that, as well as translating your ESG performance into, potentially more enjoyable conversations with the insurance market in terms of what your commitments on sustainability actually mean to insurers, similar to what's already happening with financial markets in terms of green finance and sustainability linked finance. We would like to start leading those conversations on the insurance market side as well. And one thing that we are doing to help clients in this space, and you can reach out and request access, is the Marsh ESG risk rating tool, which is around helping our clients understand their performance on ESG. So you can go through and answer quite an extensive list of questions to understand where some of the gaps in your ESG performance and your risk management strategy might lie. And then, get a kind of one-page scorecard of the things you're doing well and gaps that might exist in terms of your policies and procedures in the context of emerging risks from climate and sustainability. And then we can kind of deep dive into some of the areas that might need to be improved. And the ESG risk rating tool is really around helping you identify some of your most critical risks and opportunities related to this, helping you communicate and evidence your performance and kind of the effort that you've already made. And it provides really kind of insightful information in terms of what you're doing and where you should be going next in terms of your sustainability journey. So if this is of interest to anybody, it's a self-assessment tool. It's free to all of our clients. So reach out to your Marsh representative or Sahil or anybody on this call, and we can arrange to get you access to this. But for now, I think that's me. I won't take up any more time and pass it on to Sahil. Thanks.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you. I think that was very insightful on sustainability. So just as we extend one of the areas which are contributing to sustainability, that's electric vehicles, to start with, we'd just like to get your opinion on one of these poll questions. So which of the following are potential risks for electric vehicle manufacturers in India? So charging infrastructure, product adoption, product performance and safety, high cost of raw materials and components, cyber and Internet of Things. So this is a multiple choice question. So you have the option of selecting more than one option here. Great. So as expected, yes, charging infrastructure continues to remain one of the key concerns for the industry, and I think for the public at large as well. But yes, from a manufacturing point of view, high cost of raw materials and components, yes, India is dependent. It's interesting to see that people are also highlighting the areas like cyber and product performance and safety. So I think very interesting topics. As we move to the next slide. So yes, indeed, electric vehicles and electrification of mobility is a key focus area for India and the economies across the globe. So obviously, there are a lot of drivers that are helping this entire change, this entire transition from internal combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles. So on one side, there are drivers which are helping people adopt electric vehicles. But on the other side, there are also some challenges across the entire value chain, which are becoming a sort of a roadblock in helping people to adopt. So when you look at the drivers which are encouraging people to adopt, so obviously, first and foremost, it is the stringent emission norms. So yes, everybody, India, just like the globe, everybody is focused on reducing the carbon footprint from vehicles. The focus is towards sustainability, as Graham also touched upon, and electric vehicles play a very strong role towards helping have a cleaner and healthier environment for the future. The other element which we touched upon in the beginning, that we've seen that the focus is now increasing towards personalized mobility. People would like to have their own vehicles. Shared mobility is gradually seeing a shift towards personalized vehicles. So obviously people would like to have vehicles which are more economical to maintain and maintain for a longer period of time. On the other side, from a supply chain perspective, obviously the cost of manufacturing of batteries in electric vehicles is reducing, because that's simply because the volumes are going up. So key components and batteries, we certainly see the cost coming down. They still remain expensive as compared to the traditional internal combustion engine vehicles, but over a period of time, as these vehicles would be sold to the masses, there would be a cost parity. Indeed, on one side, when we talk about the increasing air pollution, on the other side, obviously, we are always affected by the increased oil import bill. So there's a large component of India's forex reserves which are completely going towards the import of crude oil. So the moment we are able to electrify mobility, this is going to reduce a lot of strain on our forex reserves, and we will be able to reduce the import bill significantly. And keeping that in mind, the government is taking a lot of initiatives in terms of offering incentives and subsidies so that people would look at adopting electric vehicles. And they're also offering a lot of subsidies and incentives to manufacturers so that they can set up shop here. And obviously, micro-mobility is another area which is picking up. People are looking at smaller and easier to maintain vehicles. So that's another area which will be seeing a lot of adoption of EVs as well. And one thing which we can never forget, India is the ground where we will always have the right talent and the right workforce available. So if we have to really become a manufacturing hub and have the entire value chain for the electric vehicle manufacturers completed, we have the key strength of labor and workforce. So while these are all good positives, there are also some challenges which are sort of roadblocks for the entire value chain. First and foremost, it's the adoption of the products. So people are still a little bit wary about looking at an electric vehicle for various reasons. So on one side, people are worried about the charging infrastructure. There are concerns around vehicle range. How many kilometers will my vehicle run? What if I go out of battery? Do I have a charging station on the way? What would be the potential repair and maintenance cost of an electric vehicle, keeping in mind that a large number of components, especially batteries, are still being imported? EV batteries and components, since they're being imported, there's a lot of dependence that we have on foreign suppliers. But yeah, there is a positive side to it, that India is now looking at creating the hubs for manufacturing key components. So we've seen companies who've already started talking about manufacturing of semiconductors. On the same lines, we are seeing that there are companies who are investing in manufacturing of EV batteries as well. In the last, I would say 1.5 years, because of COVID, there has been a drop in the consumer spending, and keeping in mind that electric vehicles are still much more expensive as compared to the traditional petrol or diesel vehicles. Obviously, people are, the consumer spending and the confidence in the people is obviously low. And obviously, we also have this problem in terms of irregular supply of electricity in a lot of areas. So obviously, the government has been investing a lot in ensuring a seamless electrification across the entire length and breadth of the country. But when you are looking at an electric vehicle, that's always going to be a concern, that what if you don't have the right electricity supply? And it's also a lot about consumer awareness. So people have a lot of questions in their mind. So on one side, where manufacturers are obviously focusing a lot in terms of building up their brand, they're also investing a lot now in increasing the awareness and confidence of the consumers. There are a lot of questions and concerns that people have around EVs. So manufacturers are bringing up a lot of initiatives to sort of reduce these concerns and increase their confidence in EVs. But yeah, that still remains a roadblock for people to adopt. Now, if you really look at it from an electric vehicle manufacturing company, if you look at the entire value chain, if you were really to look at these three broad areas, one is the manufacturer of the vehicle, the OEM. We would also look at the manufacturers of the batteries, the key component for the electric vehicle, and then obviously the charging station. These are three pillars which play a very strong role for the success of the electric vehicle industry in India. Now, there are a lot of risks that each of these three segments are currently exposed to. So when you look at the manufacturer of the vehicle, obviously you have a lot of these traditional risks like the exposures to the physical assets, business interruption, maybe due to a fire, a natural catastrophe event, supply chain, obviously, especially because electric vehicles use some of the components which are derived from natural resources. So there could be a shortage of natural resources as well. Then you have a lot of EV support equipment and which require a lot of maintenance. And obviously there are a lot of risks that are associated with that. Manufacturing in the automotive industry is today automated. The increased use of robotics obviously bring in the increased risk of machinery breakdown as well. There are hazards coming out of the battery. So the hazards are both for the environment and the people around. Product performance and safety. So people still have this question in their mind that if my vehicle is being run on lithium ion batteries, does that have a risk of catching fire? So those concerns are there. There have been a few stray cases around the globe where fires have been there, but yes, that's a question that comes up, and manufacturers are ensuring that these vehicles are made as safe as possible. Employee health and safety, obviously, because the fact that the automotive industry still remains a manpower intensive industry, and there are aspects in the EV manufacturing where there are some hazardous elements as well. So employee health and safety becomes crucial. The other area, obviously, that EVs are very different when it comes to from a technology perspective, when you compare them to the traditional internal combustion engine vehicle. So there is a separate set of talent that organizations are today looking at, both from a manufacturing and a research and development perspective. And there is a lot of effort that companies are making in order to ensure that they retain the talent and they groom them, because there will be people looking at them for a lot of opportunities. And then obviously keeping in mind that electric vehicles do come up with a lot of use of technology. There's increased use of semiconductor chips in EVs as well. And the fact that these vehicles are largely connected, you obviously have the risk of cyber from the product perspective. And then you obviously have the traditional cyber risks available even from a manufacturing perspective, keeping in mind that there's a lot of automation in manufacturing today. And then, yes, you have the risk from a dealer facility perspective. So even today, despite the fact that we've got a lot of digitalization that has come up in the distribution system, the brick and mortar dealers still continue to exist, and they contribute to the largest chunk of the sales for an automotive company. So the risks which obviously exist at the dealer's end. If you look at the battery manufacturers, obviously, besides the manufacturing and transportation, the key risk that comes up is how do you store and where do you store the batteries, and what is the environment appropriate for them? Are there any climate related risks coming in? Are you exposing them to some completely unforeseen risks? Then obviously supply chain, we touched upon that there are these batteries are still largely imported, the components are still being imported, but yes, India is gradually moving towards localization of this area. Product performance and safety, yes, because batteries being the heart of the vehicle, they will enhance the safety or they will increase the risk towards the safety of the vehicle. Employee health and safety, yeah, we touched upon that, but another area which I would say the automotive industry has demonstrated that despite being an industry which has not experimented with adaptive working or maybe remote working in the past, we do see a lot of flexible working approaches being adopted in the industry, and we do not see the industry being looked upon as a place where everybody has to be on the shop floor every day. So adaptive working is certainly a new trend that's coming up. Indeed, I mean, one area that we can never neglect, that as far as batteries are concerned, there are a lot of environment impacts. So I mean, while there are environment impacts for the batteries when you manufacture them, but what's equally concerning the industry is how do you really dispose the end of life batteries, the used batteries, once they've completed their life that they are supposed to. And then obviously there will be the risk of emerging technologies and obsolescence, because while currently we're all focused on lithium-ion batteries, or there are alternate battery technologies that are also being looked upon so as to ensure that there's increased safety, there's increased vehicle range. So there is a risk of obsolescence for battery manufacturers. And then last but not the least, the charging stations. Obviously, the place which is going to give confidence to the users, but then that's the area which also carries a lot of risk. So there's a risk to the physical asset, the charging outlet per se, through which the charging is being done for the vehicle. There's obviously a risk of the failure of that device itself. So somebody goes to charge a vehicle and all of a sudden realizes that there's no electricity, there's a power outage, and there is no backup available for it. So that automatically means that the product has actually failed to perform its real intended use. And then it has to also be safe because it's ultimately supplying electricity to the vehicle. So there's a risk to the vehicle, to the outlet, and obviously to the people around as well. Cyber and IoT, yes, because when you are driving an electric vehicle, it's giving you a live analysis of where are the closest charging stations. So obviously charging stations are connected. This is using a lot of connected technology. So there is a risk of cyber that comes in there. Third-party liability, obviously, because if something goes wrong at the charging station, it increases the exposure to the properties and the people around. And last but not the least, for the companies who are investing in the charging station, there's a lot of reputational risk as well. Because if there is a failure of the product, a power outage, or possibly people really go and they realize they aren't getting what they were looking for, then there is a risk to the reputation of the charging station. But it's very important to keep in mind who owns the charging station here. Is it owned by the power distribution company? Is it owned by a leased contractor, a third-party company, or is it really owned by the automotive manufacturer itself? So the risks automatically will change depending on who owns it. But yeah, so when you look at these risks, it's very important that once we have a sight of those, these are also managed very effectively and on time. So as Marsh, obviously, we've been investing in a lot of resources to help our clients manage their risks across various parameters, ranging from the fire and life safety, natural catastrophe exposure, so helping the companies assess the exposure that they have from NatCat events, the hazards that come in from batteries, supply chain risk management, which my colleague and I just touched upon, the occupational health and safety for the employees, machinery and critical equipment. So we touched upon robotics or the equipments which are used in the manufacturing, electric vehicle support equipments and facilities that are playing a very strong role in the entire value chain, cyber, and last but not the least, sustainability. EVs obviously contribute to the sustainability objectives of the country at large. So yes, as Marsh, we are happy to support you in that area as well. And Graham has touched upon that very effectively. So this is just to give you a quick overview on the bouquet of solutions that Marsh can offer. This is a mix of the traditional insurance and risk management solutions that we have for our clients, and also a lot of the solutions for emerging risks. So when you look at the traditional solutions, it would be obviously a property damage, business interruption, marine transit, supply chain. But at the same time, when you look at the emerging risks like risk management, like supply sustainability, or maybe from a perspective of the product performance and safety, cyber, account receivables for credit insurance, or another area where we're trying to help our clients is also in helping them revive sales. So we've created some affinity solutions. So maybe towards loyalty programs, extended warranties, insurance for the tires, some dealer loyalty programs. These are products which are basically helping our clients revive sales or even grow their sales. So we've got a bouquet of solutions available for our clients across the entire value chain, right from OEMs, ancillaries, dealers, and obviously the end customers as well. So as Marsh, we would be happy to support. Please feel free to reach out to your Marsh client representative, and we'll be happy to guide you there. So we bring an end to our opening presentation here, and the objective was obviously to set the context for the theme of the webinar. And we have a very impressive panel of speakers on this webinar who would be sharing their insights on what are the strategies being adopted by automotive companies in India and globally to become resilient. So Niladri, if I can just request you to put the spotlight on the speakers, and we can start the panel discussion. Great. So first of all, a warm welcome once again to all our distinguished panel speakers. So we have speakers from the industry, and we have speakers from Marsh as well. So Sudhir sir, Sachin sir, welcome to the panel discussion. And my warm welcome to my colleagues, Ishiro and Inayat, as well as Graham as well. So thank you for joining. My first question, Ishiro, is for you. The ongoing pandemic, as we see, has impacted the automotive industry globally. So what strategies have been adopted by the global automotive companies to become resilient?
Okay, I'm fast. Sahir, can I have 30 minutes to answer? It's so broad question, right? Yeah, it's a joke. So as the same as other industries, there are huge negative impact by COVID-19 in automotive industry in every aspect. As a couple of examples, for production side, it is more difficult to implement social distance or teleworking scheme in production facilities than office type of setting. Manufacturing facility had to shut down during lockdown situation so that production stopped accordingly. That's run into an issue in global supply chain disruption. On the consumer side, due to the significant uncertainty about the speed of economic recovery, consumers are deferring major purchases like vehicle and to build saving for the future needs. All of these facts contribute to drop in production and revenue during the pandemic. It is true. Some of strategies in our mind, automotive companies to consider to take to become resilient. For example, for financial view, the diversification of products or investing to less volatility products, exploring partnership or joint venture would be considered. Investing in technology is a proceeding. Manufacturing 4.0 can help to build more resilient workforce. Robots doesn't affect by COVID. AI, 3D printers are enabler of efficiency and improve product quality. Analyzing existing supply chain to identify potential bottleneck is of course necessary. Avoiding single source of supplier would help to be a resilient supply chain. While having all countermeasures are to be resilient, risks still remain. It is explained at our presentation. Risk management is key to be resilient. As you know, insurance is one of the best tools to mitigate the risk. We are Marsh, so please allow me to speak as insurance. Under the hard and challenging insurance market environment, premium rate is increasing so much. To manage your insurance program and the total cost of risk are mandatory. Set clear strategy, manage expectation of senior executives, consider alternative options, not stick to the current scheme. These are just examples of the steps to be taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiro-san. I think it was very insightful to hear about these, obviously the challenges that the industry has faced, and some of the very interesting examples you shared in terms of joint ventures and of how they are helping, and also the fact that robots are not affected by COVID. So
Yeah.
obviously the automation being a very crucial factor of this timing. So thank you, Shiro-san.
Yeah.
My next question is for Sudhir, sir. Sir, as we can see that the ongoing supply chain issues on account of semiconductor shortage is expected to ease down in the near future. So what have been the learnings for the industry to address similar such situations if they were to recur in the future?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sahil, for that question, and good afternoon and good evening to everyone and the participants as well. So on a lighter note to start with, at least a lot of us now know how to differentiate between a potato chip and a semiconductor chip. So that's the first learning, I think, for all of us. Before you get into the learnings, I just want to dwell a little bit into what is the genesis of this issue. So first of all, when I started my career about 24 years ago in automotive industry, one of my seniors always, the first thing he told me is that a vehicle, whether it's a commercial vehicle or a two-wheeler or a passenger vehicle, it has got about a few thousand parts. And even if one bolt is missing, you will not be able to build a car, and therefore you lose production. In this case, now what we realize is that even if a small chip is missing, you lose production, you lose sales. So that is where we have traveled. It is easier to find a bolt now, but to find a chip is very, very difficult. And even if you find it, you'll have to pay sky-high prices. So that's another learning for all of us. Talking about the genesis of this issue. So if you look at the overall semiconductor industry, the way it is structured, the automotive industry is actually hardly maybe 5 to 6% consume. So the market share for the semiconductor industry from automotive is just about 5-6%. The majority of the consumption happens in mobile phones and gaming and computer and Internet of Things and those kind of. So if you look at the buying power of automotive industry, it is very limited vis-a-vis the overall semiconductor industry. On top of that, the kind of quality and delivery requirements which automotive industry has in general is much, much higher than any of these other industries. So what happened? When the pandemic struck, which was sometime early 2020, there was a huge panic among especially the automotive industry. People started cutting down their schedules like anything. They just zeroed out production requirements for next few months. And what it did was obviously the orders which were placed by the tier 2, tier 3 suppliers on the semiconductor fabrication as well as assembly suppliers, they zeroed out. And what it did at the same time was that the demand from the cell phone, demand from the computers, demand from display device industries, because all of us were at home, obviously the demand for those things skyrocketed. And therefore, the semiconductor industry shifted the allocation overnight from the automotive to whatever allocation, because mind you, anyway, the allocation was just about 5-6%. And automotive industry lost that 5-6% to the other segments like the cell phone or the computer or the printer industry. And therefore, what happened when the demand started coming back for automotive, obviously there was no chip. Naturally, one more thing which all of us, I mean, at least I didn't know that by the time you place an order for a microchip, it actually can take as high as in normal times 26 weeks for that chip to be delivered. So it's a huge lead time. So suddenly if you start asking for chips tomorrow, you cannot get it because there's just no capacity available, and then there is lead time. To cut the long story short, I think the learning for automotive industry specifically is that we had to and we have to start relooking at some of the best practices of supply chain management, which we were used to for so many years. So we have been used to keeping the least inventory possible, the just-in-time, just-in-sequence kind of a model of operating. Maybe we have to relook at that in some cases, and maybe in a lot of cases, because simply the lead times were not taken into consideration. And therefore, that led to the kind of crisis that we are into today. Second and most important is the visibility. You might have visibility in your supply chain at tier 1 level, but do you really have the visibility at tier 2, tier 3, or tier N level? I think that is another big learning for all of us. And that's where all of us have to, and in automotive industry, really have to act upon now. The third is the scenario planning in terms of, if there is a pandemic which has hit, don't make everything zero in panic. You have to do some scenario planning so that best case scenario, worst case scenario, base case scenario, and then work on that. What all of us did was that we just worked on the worst case scenarios and then zeroed everything out without taking into consideration alternate scenarios which actually can manifest themselves. There's another big learning which is happening now is that people are trying to work much more collaboratively with the chip designers in terms of trying to understand how I can limit the number of chips which I'm using. So the chip technology is growing very, very fast. I think a lot of automotive applications are still using chips which are at least 5 generations behind, while the computer or the cell phone industry has actually started using chips which are just the current generation. And what it does is that a lot of computing power, a lot of memory requirement, a lot of power electronics can actually be combined and put into less number of chips than what we are using today. So that's another innovation, or not innovation, I would say, but that's another area where the automotive industry has started working on, that how I can reduce the overall number of chips that I'm using by combining the outcomes that I'm expecting from the chips. Another thing which people are doing is obviously trying to, and this is not just limited to automotive, but overall, I think countries and geographies and not geographies, I would say, the economic blocs like European Union, they're all trying to see how we can have a localized supply chain for the chips and the fab. Because today, if you look at it, almost 75 to 80% of the chip capacity is in Southeast Asia and Japan and Taiwan and Korea. People are definitely looking very, very aggressively now of how we can localize the chip manufacturing. But before that, there is also a very significant portion, which is the testing and assembly. That is also a very, very significant value add. It requires a lot of manpower. So that's another area where people are saying, okay, today let the fab happen in Taiwan or in Korea or somewhere else, but at least let us localize the assembly and testing piece of it, so that at least I'm able to de-risk one portion of the entire supply chain, which does not require so much of investment. So in a nutshell, I think these are some of the learnings which the chip crisis has given us, but I think we should try and do similar kind of analysis of all the other parts which depend on these kind of complex supply chains, and maybe take some learnings out of it and then try and apply them. That's my take on this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think three key learnings that you just mentioned. One was obviously remapping the supply chain, relooking at the application of the product using the chip, and localization. I think three very broad learnings which are very relevant in the times to come. So thank you, sir. Thank you for the insights. My next question is for Inayat, and I think Inayat, I'll be extending the talk on the supply chain topic itself. So from a supply chain perspective, what initiatives have you seen, during your risk management engagements with the clients, that the industry is currently adopting to manage these associated risks and therefore achieve more and more cost and operational efficiencies?
In fact, Sahil, Mr. Sudhir has actually given a lot of insight and the key trends. He himself being part of the OEM, he is, the insights what he has given is pretty relevant in terms of what initiatives have been taken. Another important, just to add what Mr. Sudhir has already indicated is one of the important things what I have seen, what a lot of industries are doing is increasing the supplier collaboration approach. Earlier, what we used to have is, whatever the OEM used to require at that time only, they used to put that order and get it. Now, what things have changed. There is a continuous exchange of information, which is happening between the OEM and the supplier through IT capabilities now. And their suppliers the OEMs are sharing their production schedule, a short-term or a long-term schedule with the suppliers, so that they are also ready in terms of product. So that is one very good initiative which has been taken. Second, again, Mr. Sudhir has indicated in terms of penetration of the visibility, not limited to tier 1, but going to tier 2, tier 3, to all level. One of the biggest hindrance what we have seen in terms of OEMs not approaching to not going beyond tier 1 is the contractual obligation what they have. So a lot of time the contractual obligation what the OEM has is only with the tier 1 supplier, so that they don't fail to see what is tier 2 and tier 3 is doing. So that is, so as an OEM now, a lot of supplier, as rightly said by Mr. Sudhir, they are going beyond that contractual obligation and looking for additional tier 2, tier 3 supplier as well. Another, one of the interesting case was one of the biggest manufacturer in US. They had actually done the stockpile. So as rightly said Mr. Bala, rather than doing the just in case approach, they had done the stockpile for some of the critical equipment, which really helped them is reducing the impact of these supply chain deficiency. And maybe it is not the most I would say efficient way of doing an operation, but we need to have a balance between just in time and the stockpiling, and then if we achieve that balance, possibly it's easier said than done, but if we achieve that, it will make the operation more resilient and the supply chain more resilient. And one last thing, which also I have seen a lot of OEMs are doing is having formation of a crisis cell. We have seen crisis cell in getting actuated during a disaster at their side, but now because of the disruption itself, considering the supply chain, they have now the crisis cell, which basically respond to such emergency and ensures that they mitigate the negative impact which can happen. So these are some of the things what a lot of OEMs are doing. Having said that, we have a lot of experts in our panel, so they can highlight some more of it.
Thank you, Anayat. And I think the point on the crisis cell was quite interesting because that certainly will help the companies to be better prepared as compared to their peers as well in the times to come. So moving on, my next question is for Sachin Jain, sir, and I think I'll be touching on the topic of liquidity. So strengthening liquidity has always been a key focus area for the industry, and obviously in the last couple of months, in the last 1.5 years, it has gained a lot of importance. So what are these steps being taken by the industry to address the risk which arise from credit receivables?
Thanks, Sahil, for asking this question. Being a finance professional, this is very near to my heart. So actually, liquidity has always been critical for sustenance of any business. So the COVID crisis has actually taught us something, which in my 16, 17 years of career, we always used to hear that cash flow is important, liquidity is important. But those times when we had lockdowns, there was a slowdown, no economic activity. And when we used to see our P&L April month, May month, negative losses, and there was no visibility how it is going to improve. So actually that has actually emphasized the importance of liquidity all the more in our minds. So now we understand what exactly is the importance of liquidity for the survival of the business. Earlier, we used to always feel that, okay, for growth, we used to have some borrowing, we used to manage our cash flows, we used to see our ratio analysis, what is our working capital, we used to somehow manage our overdues. So, but now actually this has taught us the lesson that it's a matter of survival. The companies who have been able to manage the liquidity properly have really come out more stronger from this crisis. So when this COVID crisis happened, our biggest worry was that which of our companies is going to face the crisis in terms of making our payments to stakeholders. So first thing what we did was to understand which companies would be able to manage their cash flows, which not. Then we made an action plan to understand, okay, what all we need to do. So we have to support our suppliers also during those crisis times. So we have to make timely payments to them. So then we approached all our customers, all OEMs, aftermarket, and the key learnings which I would say is that it's my fundamental belief that no OEM or no customer is that they don't want to pay unless there's an extreme situation. But what is important for liquidity management in the organization is the follow-up. What is our credit policy? What we have agreed with our customers? What is and how strong enforceable credit policy we have. It's not that we have just created a credit policy, and it should be enforceable because the 2I 4I concept is important in the organization. Marketing team, logistic teams, they have their own targets to deliver, but it's a finance team responsibility, the credit controlling team, to ensure that they have the enforceable policy. And thirdly is the regular monitoring. So regular monitoring is important. So I can tell you that with this regular monitoring, close monitoring, we could actually realize some of the overdues, which were long overdues. So we have actually been able to increase our cash in hand with this crisis happening. So daily monitoring, tracking, following some of these practices of close monitoring of overdues receivable, enforcing credit policies are some of the actions which we did for ourselves, learning from this crisis. And also this has made us more important, realizing that we always used to call the finance fraternity CFO. So now I use this word that it's a cash flow officer. We are cash flow officers now. We are for managing the business. On another side, that since we are speaking on the Marsh platform, so I would also like to emphasize on the insurance part of the credit risk what we have. So while managing our credits, we also try to look at that which geography, which customer we may have the credit risk, and where we need to take the insurance cover. So we try to evaluate our ECGC cover or the credit risk cover wherever possible, so that we can prevent the losses which may accrue to us. So that is what I would say, that this has gained importance. It has taught us the lesson, and it's not only actually your recoveries, your whole business cycle has to have a proper liquidity management, your inventories. So as Mr. Sahil was mentioning, that this has also taught us that we don't need to have just-in-time inventories. So there is always a conflict between the business that we need to have either just-in-time inventories or we need to have some reasonable inventories. So we have to work closely, the business have to work closely to ensure that the whole operating cycle is managed effectively to manage the liquidity.
Thank you, sir. I think two very interesting points: the importance of the credit policy and the role of credit insurance is helping organizations to manage the risk from credit receivables. I think that was very insightful. My next question is, Graham, for you. So from a sustainability perspective, what are the key initiatives being adopted by the industry to demonstrate their commitment towards ESG?
Thanks, Sahil, and really enjoying this conversation. Learning a lot myself. I think there's no surprise to anybody, the increasing focus on carbon emissions and commitments around net zero and carbon neutrality quicker and quicker is what we're seeing ramping up globally across all sectors, and the automotive industry in particular, because I think transport is, when we work our way down in terms of the biggest contributors to emissions, transport is about by third or fourth globally. And everyone can find those stats. If transport was a country, it would be the same as insert very large country here in terms of emissions. So I think the carbon emissions is a big focus, increasingly so as well, I think, on social issues and labor rights, labor conditions across the entire supply chain. And we've been talking about supply chain a lot from a risk perspective in terms of getting access to material. I think a lot of the biggest risks from an ESG and a sustainability perspective actually lie in the supply chain as well. You don't get reputational cover in this game by saying, oh, it wasn't me, it was just who I bought something of. No, you're actually going to be held responsible and liable, and it's your reputation up for risk for a lot of, in particular, the social conditions around labor rights, child labor, things like that, with rare earth minerals and EVs and batteries and all the chips that we've been speaking about. So big concerns there. I use this anecdote a lot, and I've just realized it's a perfect anecdote for this audience, because often people want me to pin myself to what's the one ESG initiative that I should do? What's the one thing I need to do? If you've spoken about all these things, what's the one thing I really need to care about? And I often say, it's actually around whatever is missing is what's going to go wrong. And if we think about a car, it's, if you don't have ignition versus you don't have enough petrol versus you don't have brakes, it's all going to be a problem for you. It's just going to define when that problem emerges and what the problem actually is. I think we need to think about that in terms of climate and sustainability as well. It's, sustainability is a holistic effort. We need to balance the trade-offs between people and planet and prosperity. So we can't throw all our eggs in one basket. We do need to kind of, make sure we have a holistic and a strategic approach. So that's really about understanding what's critical to your business and to your industry. So just my word of caution there, instead of putting all your eggs in one basket on an ESG bit for a big fancy website, is actually to take a really kind of first principles and strategic approach to ESG risk management and sustainability as well.
Thank you, Graham. So I think, yeah, you're right. I mean, combining sustainability into the overall risk strategy is obviously the way forward. So my next question is back to you, Sudhir sir, and this is obviously on the hot topic of electric vehicles. So electrification of mobility is obviously regarded as one of the key disruptive trends that we see in the automotive industry, and it is expected to impact the internal combustion engine vehicle manufacturers and ancillaries as well. So would you like to share some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think first of all, in my opinion, it's too early to write an obituary for internal combustion engines. I think they are here to stay at least for some segments for at least another 10-15 years. That's my opinion based on whatever evolution that I'm seeing in the overall industry. Also, I think sooner or later, there will be some realization that what is the problem that we are trying to solve? The problem is energy security and problem is environment. Are there different ways of solving these issues? Are there better ways of solving these issues? I think slowly but surely the solutions will emerge. Having said that, but there will be definitely some segments. For example, we are seeing that two-wheelers, it's moving very, very fast. Three-wheelers and last mile connectivity, buses, I think those are the next segments which will probably get electrified much faster. The rest of the segments, especially passenger vehicle, I think the TCO right now does not seem to be very favorable. And as far as the incentives are concerned, there is only so much that you can incentivize. And frankly speaking, why should you incentivize private consumption? So there's a different school of thought that is also being discussed there. Coming back to the fundamental question of what do the automotive component manufacturers were supplying to IC engine to? What I've seen definitely is that, as an automotive component manufacturer, you're not just a manufacturer of a component, but you're actually using a technology for manufacturing that particular component. So for example, it could be a casting technology, it could be a powder metallurgy kind of a technology, it could be a forging, it could be a machining, so on and so forth. So that is the fundamental technology that you're trying to use behind the component that you actually make. And these technologies can also find applications in an EV. You still have a transmission, you still have an axle, you still have a motor. So all these end products are still there, which actually require a fundamental manufacturing technology behind them. So what our component manufacturers have to do is to find avenues and applications in these new set of end components where their knowledge of manufacturing technology, of the core manufacturing technology can be deployed. And then of course, they'll have to retool, reskill. So that is where the way I look at it. Another point, when I said in the beginning that it is too early to write an obituary for ICE engine, is because there's a lot of work going on, not just in Europe or in Japan, but also in India, of how we can use the existing engine, ICE engine, with different input. So one of the works which is going on is hydrogen ICE, which means you use hydrogen and use the same internal combustion engine to produce energy. I think some of you would be aware that Toyota actually has announced a formation of a team called Team Japan, where they've tied up with three other manufacturers, and they're trying to aggressively pursue this hydrogen ICE concept. What it does is it protects the entire industry which is built up around ICE engine component manufacturers. At the same time, it takes care of the environment. So I think the jury is still out, but in my opinion, it is too early to write an obituary for the ICE engine. But at the same time, I would definitely urge the component manufacturers to try and step back a little bit and understand what is their core fundamental manufacturing competence, and then try and see how they can apply in the new environment.
Thank you, sir. I think that's a very very interesting insight in terms of how the automotive companies still have the scope to diversify. My next question is for Sachin, sir. If I can just touch upon the distribution strategy. So we've seen that the distribution strategy in the industry has witnessed a lot of innovation, and especially during and post-COVID. So would you like to share some insights on the distribution trends as well as the challenges and opportunities from these?
The distribution has two aspects. One is that how you are delivering to your customers. And I also look at that on the how you're managing your whole supply chain. So first I will dwell upon the first part, that on the distribution side, like we have been delivering in a normal way to our OEMs, to aftermarket. But when now we are getting into the new trends which are there, the new opportunities which we have is getting into more online platform. So like earlier we used to have the dealer network for delivering to our aftermarket network. Now we are using online platforms. We are also now capturing the online ordering from our dealers. So try to use the technology, try to capture the orders from dealers on online platform so that you deliver what is being asked for, and improve the supply chain, the pressure on the supply chain, that what is being ordered, what is being delivered. Secondly, on the distribution side itself, that how you are actually making the collections. I will just again try to correlate from the liquidity point of view, that how you are improving your collection cycle with this. So like on the dealer network side, we can start using the technology in terms of taking the online payments from a dealer. There were days earlier we used to have check payments and everything. There was always a lead time between the check deposit and everything. Now we have platforms available. Now dealers can pay online, linking with your invoices, and make the payments, no reconciliation issues and everything. And on the other side, we have to brush up our supply chains. We have seen that some of the business, they witnessed the huge demand during the crisis. Some industries, they were laggards. So managing the whole supply chain infrastructure of the organization is key to taking the opportunity of this mega trends.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the insights. And indeed, that was, I think, a very interesting insight on how the distribution strategies are also evolving. So I would like to thank the entire panel for their time and their insights. I'm sure the audience would have also valued the information that has been shared. So thank you to all of you all. We would now open the house for the audience to raise questions. There is a Q&A tab where you can post a question, or please feel free to raise your hand and we would then unmute your line so that you can ask the question live. We do have one question on the Q&A tab. So I would like to raise this to Sudhir, sir. So we have a question from Mr. Shinoy. What is the nature of the PLI announced by Government of India for the automobile industry, and how will it boost the growth for the industry?
Sure, thank you for that, Mr. Shinoy. So I think PLI, the word stands for Production Linked Incentive Scheme. So what it means is that the government is trying to promote two things by this. One is clean energy vehicles, so whether it is hydrogen, whether it is EVs. And on the other hand, the government is trying to incentivize manufacturing of advanced automotive technologies in India. So today, if you look at any vehicle, especially on the passenger car side, or also to some extent commercial vehicle side, the entry-level vehicles will have very basic features. But as you go to the top end of any vehicle, you will find that it is loaded with a lot of features, whether it is advanced driver assistance features, or whether it is advanced safety features, or advanced telematics, advanced infotainment. So all these features, unfortunately, today, they are getting imported into India. And what it means is that you would, the customer as well as the companies have to spend a lot of amount importing it. And then that starts a kind of a spiral where, because we are importing and therefore the cost is high, and since the cost is high, is the price high, and if the price is high, obviously the consumption is less. What government is trying to do is incentivize manufacturing locally of such components, which will eventually bring the cost down of those components and then increase the usage. So it's kind of a win-win. The customer gets the features even at the entry level. The manufacturers get some incentive till the volumes pick up, and we create more number of manufacturing jobs in India, which are not necessarily for production into India, but also export. So I think it's a very well thought out scheme. Of course, always it is the implementation which is a challenge, but from the initial signs which I've received talking to people, I think it seems to be a good scheme, and I'm really hopeful that it will meet the targets which have been set by the government for this.
Thank you, sir, for the insights. And I'm just being mindful of the time. So in the interest of time, we did receive a couple of questions in the register from the members who had registered. So we'll take one question, and we can promise you that for all the others whose questions stay unanswered, we will reach out to you independently. My question is for Sachin, sir. So this is a very interesting question again from the finance perspective. So is insurance a finance and procurement function, or is it a risk management function?
Actually, there's a thin line. In past, it used to be a finance and purchase function. And as the risk management process is maturing in the organizations, so this is getting more into the risk management domain now. So whenever we have our risk management reviews, risk management protocols, risk management policies, we now try to categorize this insurance in more towards the risk management rather than merely purchase or a finance function. Because now it's not only the basics that you have to cover the insurance, have some quotations, make cost comparison and do it. It involves a lot of insights into what exactly is the risk you have and what are the coverages you are taking, because this subject is now getting complex. If you're talking about any liability policies, whether it's product recall policy, we had latest changes which has happened. So the type of insurance policies the insurers were giving, you have to get into more details to find out that what are the risk coverages you need to have within those. So if you leave it to a purchase function or to some finance executive, that just take the policy, whatever the last it was. So it remains then not as a risk management. So I think this is matured and it is moving towards more risk management metrics.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the insights, sir. Yes, we are glad to hear that the scope is broadening. So in the interest of time, yes, I would like to first of all thank all our panel speakers. I personally enjoyed the entire discussion, very insightful, and I'm sure the entire audience also would echo my views. So thank you very much to our distinguished panel of speakers for taking your time. I would also like to thank all of the clients and participants on the session who took out time to join us for the webinar, and also to the colleagues in Marsh India who have supported in putting this webinar together. So thank you very much to all of you all. We will be in touch with you. And in advance, we wish you a happy and prosperous 2022.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.